This is House Planning Help episode 53. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in building or renovating. I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century. Alongside this, I have a personal goal to create an energy efficient home before I turn 40 in August 2016. Coming up in this session, I chat to self-builder Mark Tiramani. He lives in the UK's first certified passive house, but I want to talk to him about the Passive House Planning Package. And just before we go there and get into that interview, I thought I'd tell you about something that I went to yesterday in the very centre of London, right beside Big Ben and the Houses of Parliament. We went into Portcullis House, a number of people who are really passionate about group custom builds, and this was an event put on by the University of Sheffield, their home research group. Thank you very much to everyone there inviting me along and hosting such a great event with Christine Ring, who came all the way from Germany to tell us about Baugruppen and some of the developments that are going on there. Mark Wescombe from Lancaster Co-Housing, who we actually chatted to in episode 28. And one of the things that I learned from him, having done this interview and then afterwards, I didn't realise they looked at 21 different sites, a lot of them in the centre of Lancaster over a 4-year period. And it was really a joke because the people who owned the land either just didn't want to sell it and were land banking it or were asking ridiculous amounts of money. So I thought that was interesting. And Ted Stevens, the chair of the National Association of Self-Builders, he was on one of our early podcast, episode 6. He seems to be a champion as well of custom build and self-build and is always out and about and networking with high-up people in government. So well done, Ted. You're always doing a brilliant job. But one of the things that he pointed out was it's this same order of priority. It always seems to be, particularly for the UK, I don't know what it's like where you live, land is the number one difficulty, and then there's the hurdle of planning, followed by finance. All of that said, we did actually have the planning minister drop into the session for a while, Nick Bowles MP, which was quite interesting just to think that he'd made the effort to come along and see what we're all up to. But really enjoyed that and just thought I should tell you about it. Moving on to today's interview, it's with Mark Tiramani, who lives in the UK's first certified passive house. And I got chatting with him on Twitter and he invited me to stay. In fact, I did examine the guest book when I was over there and impressed by the number of people he has had come to stay. I think it's a bit like the Passive House B&B that's down in Totnes. He's doing his own version, but not official. So well done getting all those people to come and stay with you. But it was lovely to head along. And I want to share a quick sat-nav story because Mark told me exactly how to get to his house, but I was running late. I'd been filming that day, and when I got down there, yes, it was a couple of hours later than it should have been, and it said, "You have reached your destination." I thought, I cannot see the house anywhere. And if I'd done my typical man thing of, I'm just going to drive down that road, I'll find it, I'll keep on going, even though Mark had given me all these good instructions, I would have got completely lost because I was in exactly the right place, or at least the start of it. And I went and knocked on the neighbour's door, a neighbour who is about half a kilometre away. So I knocked on, she said, yeah, you just want to go through those gates and up the hill. So I didn't actually see the house once I'd arrived there. And it was only in the morning when I was able to look out and think, whoa, this is where we are. Fantastic countryside. So we're going to hear the full story of eFoil, the Passive House, but also the Passive House Planning Package. Now, Mark is not an expert, but what intrigued me is that he clearly has a passion for it and he needed to do some of it on this project, which is a situation I know we are unlikely to find ourselves in. You do need expertise. It's quite a sophisticated, integrated spreadsheet system that runs under MS Excel. And so I think Mark's story is fantastic. And all I want to do in this session is explore what the basics are, because we're not going to use it. But what is PHPP and how do the people in the architecture industry, how did they use it, and those wanting to build passive houses? I started out by asking him why he wanted to build his own house.
Well, we were actually backpacking in upstate New York as an escape from New York City every now and then. And it was about treading lightly. We'd met somebody who really impressed upon us that you shouldn't even leave half a strand of spaghetti because you actually change the natural environment. And that was a concept that gradually we understood. And then we started looking towards dreaming about building our own home. I'd never had roots, so I travelled a lot. I'd lived in several countries. My wife's from India and lived in Germany, and we were all a bit rootless. So we wanted a home. We wanted stability. And at the time, we started looking at straw bale houses. And we looked at it and we thought, we can do that. The first idea was we were going to do it in the US. We were probably going to try and become resident and stay there. I was working in New York. And things changed, life changed. We ended up in 95 back in the UK. And after a couple of years, after we'd found our feet again and settled in a little bit, we decided that we should try and realise the dream.
I'm intrigued because being travellers, and I love travelling, how do you put down those routes? When did you know this is the right area, this is where I want to stay, this is where I want to build?
Well, it started off with me and two friends, so the three lads from school, with our art teacher, who had in the 70s, end of the 60s, early 70s, bought a cottage in Pennall, just down the road here. And we used to come up here in his Vauxhall Viva, climb the mountains, have a fantastic time, and I fell in love with the landscape. So that's why Wales, that's why we ended up in Wales. But also, to be honest, it was an escape, and it was a conscious... I fought with that for a long time because I knew I was escaping the life behind me and the life that I was in, the life that I felt deeply uncomfortable with in many ways. And this seemed like a good idea. We discussed it to death. In the end, my wife Shirley found this property on the internet, and it was an abandoned cottage. So we had not a given right to replace, but it more or less, if we went about it the right way, we'd be able to put a replacement dwelling here.
This is amazing to me because we are in the first certified passive house in the UK, and this was initiated from you, is that right?
Yes. Well, the house build was initiated by us. I don't like the term eco-house because it's nonsense. It's meaningless, actually. It used to have a meaning, but now it's just confusing.
But those terms change, don't they?
You're right.
It'll be one thing one minute.
Okay, so
eco-houses.
We wanted to build an eco-house. Back then, we didn't know anything about passive house. We knew about straw bale. But once we visited Wales a few times and we did a bit of camping. We weren't backpacking anymore, a bit too old for that, but we did camping and mountain biking and hiking, and the love for the region grew, North Wales, Mid Wales. So we wanted to build a house here, but we still thought we could build a straw bale house. Then we thought we could build a green oak timber frame house, infill straw bale. So the original idea was load-bearing, single-storey straw bale, where we literally gathered the straw from neighbouring farmers, put the bales together, strapped them up, tightened them up, got our friends in, which we didn't have any at that time, really, got our pals in and built this house ourselves. So it was but that drove us. The idea that you could do that, this feeling empowered to build a house, it ended up something quite different.
What intrigues me is that we are in the UK's first certified passive house. So I want to know, when did you decide we're going down this route?
Specifically passive house, very early 2005, our designer builder John mentioned the word. We were living down Hatfield. We could only visit the site relatively infrequently, but that was the beginning of passive house for us. And at first I didn't know what it was. I had passive in my head from passive solar, from living in the States, looking at various buildings, but I'd already thought I'd understood what passive solar was, or part of the passive solar story. So as soon as I heard the word passive, I got that muddled a bit, but it was passive house, and it was German. And I'd spent 13 years in Germany. German was my first language for some years. And that immediately triggered off a sense of trust rather than suspicion, which a lot of people here seem to treat passive house with suspicion because it's foreign, should I say. They had the opposite effect with us because I thought, right, it's actually a way of working out how much energy you would require to heat a house and sort of run it. That got me interested. So that was the beginning.
One of the interesting things that you said to me is that you've played around with PHPP. Now, you're not someone who's part of construction or all of this. You've got an interest and you found out about it. But tell me about PHPP and what you've done.
Well, for our original certification in 2009, the house was certified. It was a provisional certification, I think, in April at the Passive House Conference in Frankfurt, whatever. I did the windows. I had to do therms. I had to do sort of primary calculations for...
Whoa. Let's slow down here. You had to do it. Why were you having to do it? Was this a way of cost cutting?
No.
Were you interested?
No, it was... it's a very, very long story. It's a difficult story, but there were two projects going on at the same time in parallel here. So Canolf and Hithgen, which John did with Powys and Welsh funding down in Machynlleth, that build was going on in parallel to this one. So there was only so much resource and there was only so much knowledge and expertise, and time was kind of running out and various whatever. Cut a very, very, very long story, a story that started at the end of 2002 and is, if you like, still continuing.
But were you ultimately pleased that you did have to do this?
Absolutely. I mean, that for me, actually getting to grips with PHPP, that's really what unlocked it. It dispels all the myths and mystery. It's just a tool to work out what the building's going to do thermodynamically. And using building physics, it joins up all the dots. And it was having to do something. I calculated, a very rough calculation, I spent 700 hours, 695 of which were stumbling through stuff, bits of German documents, spreadsheets from all over the place, Google searches, EN, whatever. I could probably come up with the numbers, but I won't try. The various standards and the standard calculations and how you do it. And the reason for that, there were two reasons. One was the time pressure. So we wanted to get certification and we wanted to get it done for the Passive House Conference in 2009. But we were still in a caravan, on paper at least, and most of the time it was extremely cold. Been a very, very long road to get the house up and more or less habitable. And we were desperate, absolutely desperate. We were at our wits' end. We had to move in somewhere. We had to get this place going that we'd invested so much energy in and that had nearly crushed us, to be honest. So there was like, I'm not going to fail at this point. I'm going to do it. I'll do it myself. So I went through, did the window calculations. And it would have all, yeah, go on.
How would that start then? You say you've done the window calculations. Let's just take one window. You've got the program. What are you putting in?
Well, okay, for a start, it doesn't start with PHPP. You need to have the specs of the window. You need finite element analysis, two-dimensional, some form of software. I use Therm, which is the freely available software, which is brilliant, a bit clunky, but brilliant in terms of the algorithms and stuff. So I learned how to use that. I have to say, I'm an IT professional. So I deal with laptops, computers, servers mostly, but sitting in front of a spreadsheet, it's a pain. It's not something I particularly relish, but of course I'm comfortable with it. I know what it's doing. I've been a bit of a programmer as well. So it was complex, but it's before that. It's working out what the frames can do. So you have to break down the window into all its elements and the glazing, the coating, the spacer, the actual frame, and you have to do precise measurements, create a little CAD drawing, and then do the window on its own according to the standards and the window installed in the wall. So the actual install window. And you have to get the numbers out of that, and then you use that to put into PHPP. That is not the normal route. The reason we had to do that was because of the 3 window quotes we had to take the cheapest. I suppose we could have gone for the middle quote. So we had, starting from the top, OptiWin, Internorm, and Nordan. Now, Nordan, this is the story I know, I might be slightly wrong, but anyway, they tried for Passive House Institute, Darmstadt, they tried for official certification on these windows, but what was being demanded of them, as I understand it, was a little bit too, they didn't want to do it, relatively small company, couldn't see the gains at the time, so they withdrew from certification process. So the windows that we got installed were sold as Nordan Entech Passiv, so as a passive house window, but without certification. Now, if you buy something that's in the database and is included in the PHPP spreadsheet, and you can just got a huge drop-down list, you select it from that, it's certified.
Right. Let's see if I understand this, because I certainly won't be going and putting all these numbers into PHPP. But the reason that you had to do all of this was because you didn't have the data in the first place.
Yes.
Whereas if you'd used certified products, the data is there.
Well, if you go into now, I have to say with the latest version, I've completely redone from scratch PHPP using version 8.4. And
why are you still using it?
Oh wow! First of all, it's just that I can't bear something that I don't understand. And that can be a real handicap for me sometimes. And it can be incredibly boring and tedious. But if I've got something like, I used to be a glider pilot, and it wasn't enough just to fly. And that's probably why I stopped, because it wasn't enough just to fly. I had to know why thermals happen and the dynamics and the aerodynamics of the aircraft. And I just got distance then from the actual pleasure of flying. That's me. That's my problem, if you like. But this took years to understand that this wasn't just a well-insulated house. But gradually it dawned on me that there didn't seem to be anything else out there that you could actually we're so used to stuff. We play with our smartphones. We just do stuff. We press buttons. We expect this incredible stuff, worldwide communication, just to work, right? We expect our car to do decent mileage if we've got whatever. We expect it to be comfortable to drive. We expect the climate inside our car often to be better than the climate inside our house. We set our targets very high. But with housing across the world, our standards are almost non-existent. Our experience, our understanding of building physics up until recent decades has been either intuitive or in some cultures, some civilizations, they've built with local materials where they don't have a heating problem. So where you've only got a cooling problem. I wouldn't say it's simpler, but there are lots of places in India, they've got incredibly elegant solutions for cooling a building. But for heating a building, there wasn't anything. And so we start to understand, wait a minute. Okay, so we started off with a wood burner in here.
When you say you started off with a wood burner, this is before you've built anything. This is in your mind, or you didn't have there wasn't one right in front of us here.
We live in the middle of a 3-acre kind of woodland and whatever, very, very hillside, all sloping. But there's lots of wood. And our first question was, before Passive House came out, one of our first questions was, would we have enough firewood from our own land? Because we're like 500 metres, half a kilometre from the nearest asphalt road, 6 miles from the nearest town. We're not cut off at all, but it's very rural. And the idea of having to pay for wood or travel to get it seemed a bit daft. Do you know what? When we first asked that question, the answer was, well, I'm not sure, I don't think so, because you need dry wood, you need this, because even the people that were, helping us build the house, their experience was, to heat a house around here, you need tonnage of wood. So then we don't have a wood burner, we've got nothing in it. But that was partly time pressure, finance, just the pressure of wanting to get in. It wasn't certain. We couldn't find a wood burner that was small enough at the time of designing, so 2006-07.
Can I ask, has that in hindsight been a blessing that you didn't go down that route?
Totally. So there's two things there. It's like this being the first certified place. This isn't the first highly insulated, airtight house. Not at all. We're not. We don't really see ourselves as kind of. We see ourselves as specifically as pioneers of seeing a project through to certification, and that's because of my pig-headedness and whatever. So I was driven to make sure it's certified. At the time, nobody knew how much heat you'd have to put into a building like this, a detached building in the UK, if it was Passive House. There was no comparison. Now, there wasn't really any point in asking somebody down in Bavaria or in Darmstadt or even in Bonn. But in the end, that choice was it was one day we were umming and ahhing, we'd gone backwards and forwards. I calculated 5 times. We'd said we're having a chimney, we're not having a chimney, because there was going to be an isokern chimney stack all the way through, and the actual structure in the I-beam floor is still there to strengthen that area to take the thing. In the end, I said, look, I can't take, no, come on, we're not going to have it. My decision, we're not going to have any kind of burner. I don't regret that, simply because we've now ended up with a house that has no fixed form of heating at all. There's no underfloors, nothing. We've got one single oil-filled electric radiator and a bioethanol which does about a kilowatt output that I made myself with 3 stainless steel things in a thermalite block. And we've got one 60-pound eBay glass and metal thing with a stainless steel that will hold about half a litre of bioethanol. So those are the only forms of heating we've got.
And how often are you using these?
The last time we heated, I think, was beginning of March with anything, except twice, just because it felt right. And the thing with a little bioethanol burner is you can just carry it around the house and just plump it down anywhere. So you have this little thing with these 3 lights, flames flickering, and it's a live flame. It's a focus. It makes you feel warm just looking at it. And it does give off significant heat. That week before last, I think, used that.
Just getting back to PHPP, what is it actually calculating, if that's not a really stupid question?
It's not a stupid question, because I'm sure that's what people want to know. What is it calculating? Well, it's calculating a whole bunch of things. The things that people know about are the specific space heating requirement. That's the famous 15 kilowatt hours per square metre per year. You can pass on that alone, plus overheating, plus total primary energy consumption. So there's basically those 3 things. But you can also pass on the heat or heating load. And that's calculated based on climate data and to try and simplify it really, you have to use climate data. You try and use at least 20, 25 years. There's now good models available for the whole of the UK. Well, some are better than others. And part of that climate data is a calculated coldest temperature that is reasonable to assume outside. And on that basis, with that temperature outside, 20 inside, for our house, it's nominally, I think it's 3.7 out, minus 3.7 outside, 20 inside. How much heat do you need to put in to maintain that temperature, that internal temperature? It's more complicated than that, and I'll probably explain it wrong, but that's different to how much heat you will need per square metre per year. So the heating load, if you've got that below at 10 or below, you can certify on that, even though, let's say, your specific space heating requirement is much, much higher.
I think my mind's just going a bit blank here.
Sorry,
but no, that's fine. That's fine. For some people, they'll just know exactly what you're talking about now. But that's good. Okay, so I'm going to shift it on a bit just because we're running out of time. So how much work did you do on PHPP, and what did it allow you to discover and see things differently?
So for the initial certification, I did the windows because basically we had to prove to the Passive House Institute that they were good. This is a window that had already been pulled from certification. I looked at it and I thought, this has got to be right. It can't be that bad. All the therms calculations said it was good. So I did all that, right. I made a big deal out of it because it was new to me and I didn't have anybody really guiding me. So I had to teach myself. So it was a big effort. But I got that. I did my level best. I went around and measured stuff, got the materials exactly as I could. Unfortunately, we didn't get the data that would have been nice to have from the manufacturer. But that's another story. So I had to do that. That was good. That unlocked a few things. But it left a load of mysteries. So that was in 2009. We're now in 2014, and it's only about 2 months ago that I completely redid with the latest PHPP, just started with scratch, because there were things in there I wasn't quite happy with. And there's a couple of things are very difficult to do in PHPP, really. Shading is one where it's a bit down to guesswork. So it's the artistic license. And you can make a big difference, particularly in a house like ours where we've got... Some people don't like the fact that we've got this much east glazing. That's for us, it had to be there. For me, it had to be there. So we've got a full height, we've got loads of glazing on this southeast corner where we're sitting now, and I love it. I love it. I would not be without it. So I wasn't going to compromise on that too far. But a lot of people would say we've got too much glazing in there, for example. Now, there were things about our original PHPP where the shading was simplified. And we're on a site, as you've seen, it is it's like a 90-degree angle and a bit more, but you can imagine in winter the sun disappears quite early. So, but you can't accurately enter that into PHPP. It's all done on 4 directions and horizontals. So imagining that hill, which I'm pointing to, which of course you can't see, that hill over there, which slopes at 25 to 40 degrees, it's imagining that as a horizontal straight line at a particular height. It's imagining those trees. What are those trees? All those trees there, are they opaque or not? No, they're not. We get about. So to get an accurate figure, you've got to know a lot about the shading of a particular site, right? it doesn't matter for many buildings, and really, to build a passive house, in a way, you want to forget too much about the shading, because so many houses, you could have something built in front of it 10 years later. Suppose something gets thrown up at that critical sector where you've relied on solar gain in the winter, and it blocks out your sun.
Or trees. You've got trees out there. What if they grow massively?
Well, you see, ours aren't going to, because the ones that are blocking are massive and a couple of 100 years old. So they're not going anywhere, really. And in winter, my estimate is between 40 and 60% still gets through of that critical phase. But then the sun goes behind a hill at a time of year where if we're on a clear day, we're getting significant kilowatt hours, and we're not getting them some of it because of the trees. So to enter all that stuff, what I did was, there was the windows, the window sizing, there was the way the windows were placed in PHPP. So if you've got two opening lights and a fixed light, right? So the middle one is fixed, right and left are opening, turn and tilt. The one in the middle has a much better thermally broken frame. It's much simpler. It's a fixed bit of glazing. The ones on the left and right, there's much more wood in there. There's hinges, there's all sorts of stuff. So they're not as efficient. Now, the side the windows opens on is important. So where the handle is and that bit that opens, is it on the left, or is it on the wall side where the window's fixed into the wall, or is it on the side next to the fixed glazing element? Right.
So, am I right in saying that this is a lot of work, really? It's not that it isn't worth it, because we know, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it is, but I love it, because particularly doing this, I'd say, and this is probably how we got to this point, trying to do a podcast about PHPP. I know I've made mistakes in it. I'm not properly trained, whatever that means. Yeah, so I'm self-taught, but I've got the time and the passion to dig and dig and dig. And I have some people who really do know what they're doing. If I think I'm not sure, I can ask them, and they do help. Thank you very much, guys. So I get help to questions that I can't answer or work out myself with my IT and computer knowledge and spreadsheets and stuff. And that then led to a PHPP, which we now have, where I've gone, 90%, there's a couple of bits I've just taken, bits that I'm not actually in a position to measure, assumptions which are okay, but I'm confident that it's extremely accurate in terms of what you can, because it's as built, as the trees stand, as the wind blows. So, for example, if you're in a sheltered spot, how sheltered? It's another thing in an urban environment, and PHPP gives you the various options, and you can take a range of figures to describe how sheltered it is. Now, again, if you're very exposed, it can make quite a significant difference to your space heating requirement. If you're very, very sheltered like we are. Now, okay, I know now we lived in a caravan for a year before we moved into the house here, so we've been here since 2008. And we've had two of the worst winters on record, so we've got a good idea of what really happens here. And we're extremely sheltered. Pretty much. It's a spot which obviously a couple of 100 years ago somebody picked, because it's a very good location. It's very sheltered.
This has been certified Passive House standard. So you said that you made lots of mistakes, or some mistakes in PHPP, or you're not sure if you did. So if it's met the standard, does that not mean that you haven't actually made those mistakes? Does that make any sense?
No. Okay, well, this is, of course, PHPP is a spreadsheet. I read recently that somebody described it, one of the recent Passive House projects in the UK. It's a simple spreadsheet. Well, that blew my mind, because it's anything but a simple spreadsheet. There's always a struggle with something like that, where you've got a user interface and you type stuff in. That's me typing on the table now. If I make a mistake with a number, a decimal point, or this or that, it's combining so many different factors about a building. The properties of the ground, the thermal bridges, every detail that you can capture is in there somewhere. How do you really join all those dots in a way that corrects every mistake? It doesn't try to correct every user error. It can't. Every iteration of PHPP does that a little bit better. But it's a very complex, behind-the-scenes, deciding which bit to take from where and how to join it on, in the sense of, have I put in a number that is realistic? Where do I throw up an error? And that's been one of the criticisms of it. Didn't throw up enough errors, so it allowed users to put stuff in that they honestly thought was correct, but actually go back and look at it and think, oh no, they misunderstood a little bit. So it does require quite a lot of time, attention to detail, but it's eminently learnable. And I think there's a lot of architects and designers that are fearful of it because it suddenly appears as if something's dictating to you how you've got to put your building together. It doesn't do that. It doesn't. PHPP isn't a design tool. It's not telling you in the sense of aesthetics or architecture.
Well, I think that's a good point to leave it. And I've really enjoyed coming here and seeing this and having a chat with you. So, Mark, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
There are some pictures of Mark's house e-foil in the show notes. I've also embedded a video clip that I made when I was down there. What's it like to live in a passive house? And Mark explains what it's like for him. And there's more on PHPP. We've been taking the notes. I actually suspect that Mark is very good at PHPP now. I can't verify that, but I know that he hangs around with a good crowd, so I'm pretty sure that his current calculations will be very good. houseplanninghelp.com/53 is where the show notes are. You can make your comments, or if you've got any questions, we'll try to get them answered. So closing business, well, we've had a flurry of iTunes reviews, but I think we'll leave those for another episode because I wanted to finish up on our Kickstarter campaign. This was my idea to make a documentary on the importance of airtightness, something that I think is slightly misunderstood. I've enlisted the help of air leakage expert Paul Jennings, and you can find out more about this. I recorded a special episode, houseplanninghelp.com/51. At the time of recording, we're about halfway through in terms of time, so we've used up nearly 15 days and we have 15 to go, and we've raised £2,533, our target being £5,500. Remembering that we haven't reached the halfway mark yet, and we've only got those 15 days to go. Strangely, I don't feel too worried. I'm sure this will just work out one way or the other, and I feel there's a limit to how much I can ram this down your throat. You know about it now, so if you are one of those people who was going to become a backer, please, now is the time. houseplanninghelp.com/Kickstarter. It's one of those things, I'm not going to get stressed about it. Perhaps it means that my idea isn't a good one, or it's too early on to do this. We can try again another year. But it would be great if we can make it happen on this attempt. I have learned quite a lot about crowdfunding. It's been really interesting. And as I mentioned last time, I don't think the point of this is about massive sums of money that have to be donated by each person. It's more a case of the numbers. I'd love to see more people validating the idea, even if it's the lowest possible bid. You put in $1 or £1. So if that's you and you can help out, we would love that. Once more, houseplanninghelp.com/Kickstarter. Next time, my guest is Mike Coe. He lives in an autonomous house, and we're going to explore exactly what that means. Until then, take care.